Welcome back to Evolving Waves, where we ride the tides of adversity to reach the shores of success. My guest today is a recurring guest who has definitely checked off that box and more. He has definitely overcome the tides of adversity and reached the shores of success, and today we'll talk about some of those successes. Jonathan Boncek is back with us. He's going to share more about how he got into his life of therapy and helping other people, and talking more specifically about what he does now. The last episode, we got into the details of what made him who he is, and today we're going to find out exactly what he does. So before we get into any of that, got to take a second to shout out our sponsor.
Before we get into his story, we want to quickly shout out our sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Stingray Branding, a national lead generation-focused marketing agency that helps businesses generate an ROI from their marketing efforts, including web design, social media, Google search, email, automations, and more. Learn more about them at stingraybranding.com.
Yeah, with that said, Jonathan, we're so glad to have you back. First episode was great. I can only imagine what lies in store for this one.
Thanks, Neil. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you back and talk in a little bit more detail about what it is that you do and how you do it. And I think we ended the last episode by talking about how you got into the world of therapy, where the experiences you had as a kid could have shaped you in a very different way. And those experiences do shape a lot of people in the wrong ways, but not you. You're unique in that aspect. So how did all of this, from the experiences as a child to the business ventures you went into, how did all of that influence your decision to pursue rapid transformational therapy?
Yeah, so I exited the business that I mentioned in the first episode in 2019, and so I started again. I had a coach that said, "What puts a skip in your step? What gives you energy?" And it was having deep, meaningful conversations. And I continued my meditation practice that I mentioned in the first episode, leaning into that and, asking, what is it that I need to do? Because I do believe, Neil, that each one of us has a unique skills and attributes to serve the world in our unique way. And I didn't know what that was for me. I just said, you know what, I'm gonna keep on being open and asking. And that meditation is, I want to find, truthfully, financial freedom through helping people, whatever that looks like. And that was kind of my mantra putting out into the world. And in 2023, actually, I heard a podcast, the Know Thyself podcast, and a woman named Marissa Peer was on it. And she is a hypnotherapist out of the UK that had developed rapid transformational therapy. And I was like, I love what this woman is talking about. She is bringing neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality, and has come up with a modality that incorporates all that is highly effective based on what I heard. This is great. Cut to, I'm done with that podcast. I kind of let it go. And previously, I'd started getting into breathwork practices within my meditation. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, there's a lot of different styles of breathwork, but they can really open up a lot of emotional things that we've been clinging into our body by putting our body literally into different states. And I was doing a breathwork about 2 weeks after I heard that podcast, and it was a very intense 20-minute breath work, and so your body's really fired up. And one of the prompts in the breath work meditation is, what do you want to prioritize in your life? And this might sound crazy, but I literally heard RTT, just like that. So much so I had my AirPods on, and I'm like, took them off. What? Like, did I just hear something? Put it back on, continued doing it. At the end of it, again, what do you want to prioritize? Again, I heard RTT. And whether it was a construct of my mind or a mystical experience, it really doesn't matter, is how I interpret it. And that's also something I share with people. It doesn't matter if something happened or didn't happen. It's how you interpret it and picked it up.
Nothing is either good or bad. It's how we think of it.
Correct. And that second time, Neil, I heard that, my whole body lit up in goosebumps. And I started crying, and I didn't know why I was crying. It was nothing sad. It wasn't like tears of gratitude. It was just like my body was doing something, and it was a really unique experience. And I'm sharing it to the world right now. But I for a long time I was like, are people like, how are they going to receive this? But again, I was like, I think I need to do this. Something is nudging me in this direction. So got on their Marissa Peer's website and said, hey, what is their discovery call? And they said, we'll call you tomorrow. And truthfully, it was a sales call, but a qualifying call to see if I wanted to go through this training, which was quite a big investment. And within the first 5 minutes, I was like, I'm in. I don't, financially, is it the best time? Probably not. But thinking about it, I was like, everything in my body and my heart and my mind right now is saying that this is what you've been asking for. And if you turn this down, if you look away, that you're going to be thinking about this or regret this for a long time. And so I just signed up, and I said, and it was a year-long school, and it ended with a 5-day immersive in LA with Marissa. And I just fell in love with the modality. I saw it in action. It was rapid 1 to 3 sessions with people. I had been in therapy before, and I had found a little bit of benefit from it, but I felt like I was reiterating my problems over and over again. And so I just went all in and said, you know what? I think this is what I've been asking for, and I need to trust that it will work out. And that is literally what led me into that.
Yeah, so you kind of already answered this, but in a little bit more detail, how exactly does RTT work?
Yep, absolutely. So rapid transformational therapy pulls from cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, and hypnotherapy. And so there is a framework for how our session needs to run, and it covers 4 I's. The intake is normal talking back and forth. I want to know what do we really want to work on with intention? Because people can come into my office, anxiety, depression, addiction, low self-esteem. Like, let's not overload the subconscious. One thing that we can work on today. Let's be intentional with that. And then I'm going to find out symptoms and triggers and habits around that issue. Hypothetically, let's just say it's depression. When do they feel depressed? What are they saying to themselves, etc. Then I'm going to say, hey, I need a 5-minute interpretation of your childhood. This is not regular therapy. Most of the time I have to cut people off because they'll just start spewing everything about the child, which is fine. That gives me a lot of information. And then I say, what does life look like? And I'll just use you here since you're the host here. What does life look like to Neil without depression? And this is, I like to call it like dreamscaping. What does your ideal life look like? And some people struggle with this because it's like, well, I don't want to feel depressed. I don't want to feel like I can't connect with anybody. Let's reframe that. What does a person that doesn't have depressed, how do they act? How do they wake up? How do they interact with their family, their partners? How do they move through their work? What are their goals? Like, literally, what are their vacations? And this is called life without the problem. And this is very important because once I start guiding them to have all positives of how they want to feel, not how they don't want to feel, how they want to feel, I'm going to set that aside. And so then we move from the intake into the investigation. And this is where we utilize hypnosis. Hypnosis gets a funny reputation out in the world. And there is stage hypnosis, and that is a whole nother side thing. But what hypnosis really is a deep relaxation of the nervous system with the inward gaze of intention and open suggestibility. So what we can do is a lot of people struggle with even relaxing their nervous system. So if you can start to get into that relaxed state, you can start to move your brain waves from beta, which is what you and I are in right now, which is our logical thinking brain, into alpha. And alpha and theta, which is up underneath, is where the subconscious can start to bubble up. Now, one side piece. Everything in a child's life from 0 to roughly 7 to 9 years old, they are 100% in alpha theta. The beta brain has not kicked in yet. Beta brain kicks in roughly in 7 to 9 years old. This is also why our memory struggles to go back previous of 7 to 9 years old. This is also when, I imagine children don't listen to this podcast, children start questioning the tooth fairy, Santa Claus, because
authority in general.
Right. They have enough framework within their minds now to say, well, I want to believe, but this thing says made in China on the back, and the tooth fairy's thing, a message is written in my mom's handwriting. So digress. I get them into a hypnotic state, and I'm going to guide them, you in the situation. Neil, we're going to go back to a scene, a place, and time that you first felt depressed in your life. Years, months, days are peeling away. We're going back to a time, event, a place that all has to do when you first felt depression, because what we have to do is get to the feelings. Feelings are the language of the subconscious. Feelings are the realest thing you have. I can tell my wife she looks beautiful, but if she does not feel beautiful, my words don't matter. And so it's all about feelings. This is also why gaslighting is so dangerous. People say, well, you're an idiot for feeling that way. This is the realest thing I have. It's what I feel. So we're going to go back to 3 to 5 scenes where that feeling of depression first came up, because it's important what was happening there within that feeling that caused a belief system to develop. And this is really where you get to the good stuff, because we're going to find those 3 to 5 scenes. And then I'm going to say, hey, Neil, your mind, not me, your mind came up with these 3 scenes that led you to be depressed in my office today. If you had to reinterpret these with your mind being 35, I'm just guessing 30, 35 years old, 40.
Not quite.
Okay.
31.
31. So your mind said at age 5, age 9, and age 16, these scenes absolutely affected you with depression at 31 in my office today. If you had to connect what belief was picked up in these 3 scenes that led you to depression, what would that be? Because it's important they make the connection, not me. I can usually see it pretty quickly, but it's typically, I'm not enough. I'm just not worthy. I'm different and I can't connect with people. What I want is not available to me, so I've just given up on that. And that's a lot of times with love and partnerships. I was never shown love, so I figured I wasn't lovable, so I gave that up. And so most issues can distill down to those 3 things. And so we move to the third eye of the interpret. Now we're going to interpret with the mind you have today, because now we have a developed frontal lobe, we have logic, and we can say, well, that's really not a true belief, because I have these other situations in my life where, I'm going to try to find a reference of when they felt good enough or felt succeeded. So interpret it. Then we interrupt it, because what we have to do is interrupt that belief system that's been running over and over again. And then we move, so there'll be 9 different tools depending on what comes up on how to interrupt based on whatever comes up. Then we moved into the install. And this is where I pull the words at the beginning that I want to feel this way, and I weave them in to and I record this, that is a self-hypnosis custom audio. And that install part is about 15 minutes long. And what I do is all the feelings that you would want to feel, I am weaving them in with direct mental prompts, because your mind does what it thinks you want it to do. So that's very important that we direct, instruct, command, compel our mind to react in the way we want to. Instead of, I don't want to feel depressed. The mind doesn't know words like don't. If I say, Neil, don't think of a pink zebra, you have to think of the pink zebra to then say, I don't want to think of that. So the mind learns through repetition. So that after that install, I bring them out of hypnosis, and that's the end of the session. 50% of the work is there. The other 50% of the work is now making that installation recording familiar in your mind by repetition. Your homework now is to listen to this for a minimum of 21 straight days. 15 minutes long, 21 straight days. Because the mind learns through repetition. Yep. And through that repetition, those new neuro synapses, those connections are becoming thicker and thicker. What wires together fires together. So we have to keep on hearing that. And with that self-hypnosis audio, you're getting into an alpha theta state. So you're literally creating new belief systems because you're creating new synaptic connections. That is neuroplasticity happening.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot to go into there. I love it. No, this is great. This is great content. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is I think that a lot of patients would find you lovable after going through a few sessions with you and seeing what you can do for them. Because if it's anything, even like me, who's not a patient, who's just a host of a podcast, I've definitely gleaned some things I can definitely take into my life. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think you're probably the first person to ever over guess on my age. Everyone always guesses 25, 26. I'm just it's unique.
All due respect.
I don't know. I don't think of it as a good or bad thing. In fact, maybe it's a good thing that you see me as someone who can have these kinds of conversations as someone who's older. Maybe that's part of the development phase.
It's your maturity, not your appearance.
No, I wasn't saying one way or another.
Yeah.
It was just I found it interesting that you are a unique individual, and it goes back to what you were saying, the point about how nothing is good or bad. It's all about how we think of it to be, and that's something I want to get to in a second. The perception of everything. I wanted to follow up on hypnosis a little bit because, like you said, it gets a very weird reputation. In fact, crazy enough, pure coincidence. Just last night, I watched an episode of Family Guy where Peter Griffin gets hypnotized, and he's hypnotized into performing a sexual act on his wife every time he hears a certain sound. It's crazy. It's a TV show. It's meant for laughs. It's not
good for Lois.
Correct. If you know the episode I'm talking about. But that is the perception of it. And again, this is going to lead into a more perception versus reality conversation. But that is the perception of hypnosis, that it can be used to do crazy, unimaginable things in the real world. Can you debunk some of the myths about it and just tell us, like, what's fact, what's fiction, what can hypnosis do, what can it not do?
Sure. Hypnosis is powerful, and it does take a lot of trust. Now, stage hypnotists, right? They will use 1 out of 10 people are very highly suggestible. And so what happened with the stage hypnotist, they will use really filtering questions to start to identify who would be open to dancing around like a dog or a duck on stage. And that very select questioning they're going to be able to. And that is hypnosis. Hypnosis is a deep relaxation of the nervous system to open up suggestibility. And so making that suggestion to dance around like a dog or a duck on stage. Now, within my work, obviously this is I try to create a safe space for people within hypnosis. And people are like, am I going to be out of control? Saying, no, you actually are more in control because we're dealing with the subconscious. And your subconscious drives your behavior patterns 95% of the day. So you won't do anything you normally wouldn't do. That person up on stage would be open to that. And through the questioning, they figure out, oh, this person is fun. They're up for a show. In my office, if I could get people to do stuff they wouldn't want to, I'd be like, why don't you just write me a check for $10,000? And I wouldn't be in this game. It doesn't work like that. They would say, no, sorry, come on out. And again, you are almost in hyper control because you turn that lens. When you shut your eyes, you knock out 70% of the inputs coming into your brain. And so now we take that lens inside. And so if I start making suggestions that aren't something you would normally do, they're instantly going to be like, no. And what's great about hypnosis is typically it's a very direct response. And I use a lot of, so you were feeling, would it be true that you were feeling powerless in the situation, true or false? And so I'm really trying to, because people will say, no, that's not true at all. Or yes, that is true. And so people are almost more attuned to it. Now, it can be used in other situations in malintent, and there might, I don't want to open up a can of worms as far as government stuff, but it's interesting on the mind control on different peripheries of hypnosis. But what I do within the majority of hypnotherapists are they're creating a safe space, because if your subconscious doesn't feel safe, you're not going to get to that point at all, because there's going to be a blockade even to feel that relaxation of the nervous system.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. I think that there is a very fine line, kind of a gray area between what is perception, what is reality, and what is myth and what is fact. And I think, going back to the Family Guy example, I think they were kind of playing off of that. But it is kind of scary if you think about it. If someone were to use the skills that you've developed and honed over time, some of which are from your own experience in life, some of your own own failures, as you call F for feedback, not for failure, but nonetheless your struggles. And it goes back to the example of what you could do as a kid who grows up being bullied. The response could be infinitely worse than what it turned out to be with you. So again, there's the issue of channeling the skills and the expertise for good that you've clearly done. And I'm sure that does come to your mind when you're, maybe not when you're in the middle of a session, but I'm sure when because you're a very reflective guy, I'm sure you've thought about that at some points. Do you then use those moments where you have like an aha moment with either a client or someone in your family? You use those moments of not remorse, but of learning, of feedback that you had as a kid and through business in your current world of therapy today?
I think there's a direct correlation personally, because I have seen the hardest things that I went through in life were actually some of the best things that happened to me. Now, I call them gifts. I didn't unwrap that gift of being an overweight kid until I was 37 years old, and I looked at my own eyes in the mirror, like I mentioned last episode. That gift of the Fun Factory and my brother-in-law, I'm still unwrapping that, being here on this podcast. That wouldn't have been the case. I wouldn't be here if all that hardship didn't happen. So, I do try to pull, because that is my personal experience, I do try to listen to people's stories and hear, even when they're in a hypnosis session, of this was the belief system that I picked up as a 5-year-old, and get into that interpret part of the session. It was like, is that true? You told me X, Y, and Z, because I can't tell them, hey, this gave you this. It has to be their realization. So a lot of questioning, is that true? You told me that you weren't good enough as a little kid, and that belief has been causing you depression. But on the intake, you mentioned that you really find a lot of happiness in X, Y, and Z. So you had to be good enough for that situation. So it's a lot of questioning of, not in the case of you're wrong, but I want you to think about this differently. I want you to shift your lens over to the side and look at it in a new light. And you mentioned, what is fact and what is reality? And there's 8 billion people on this planet. There's 8 billion realities happening because of our perspectives of that. Your perception is what you believe to be true. My perspective is what I believe to be true. Those two stories are different based on your past, your experiences. And I believe they're all facets of the whole, And so to be able to look at that, we live on a round planet, and it's like, well, the southern hemisphere, if you look at it from the bottom, is spinning counterclockwise. The top, it's spinning clockwise. So let me shift and look at this differently. And if I can shift my perspective and look at it differently and find some sort of piece of light, of hope, of gratitude within that shift, start to be curious and go down that, because curiosity will lead your way.
And again, there's yet another example of perspective and our own personal versions of reality. We live on a round planet. Well, no, we don't, say some people. We live on a flat plane.
Sure.
So it doesn't necessarily correlate. Like the science that has been proven doesn't necessarily correlate to everyone's belief. There's fact, and then there's the one reality that we all live in. Like there are some things that are just factual, and then there are things that we perceive to be factual but are not, but we think they are. So to us, they are. How do you distinguish those with your patients or clients?
So I'll get back to the word resonate, because when something resonates with you, when there is a feeling within the body, feelings are the realest thing you have. So let's start to, what resonates with you? And sometimes I might be guiding a client and they might be like, no, that's not true. There's no resonation there. And so let me flow with this client to find something. And sometimes within this, I'm looking for some lip quivering. I'm looking for like some choking up, because there's where the emotion's stuck. Because a feeling needs to be expressed in tears.
It's trapped.
Or it'll make other organs weep. Dis-ease starts to happen within the body. And so, yes, it needs to be released. Express. Expression is the antithesis of depression.
Yeah.
Think about what we're suppressing, repressing in our bodies. I need to express this out. And so going back to we are all unique, what is your unique expression? So I'm trying to find what resonates. And I might be looking for, some quivering, some tears. I'm not trying to make people cry, but I want to get to the point where they can release some of these stuck emotions.
I guess that makes sense. There's a way to pick up on nonverbal cues that I guess is a gift. I mean, we can all do it to an extent, but to do it to the extent that needs to be done to have a breakthrough is a different type of skill set. So to wrap up this episode, I wanted to touch on what you talked about. One of the many things you talked about that spurred another thought in my head, gaslighting. And that comes into perception versus reality. And I wanted to talk specifically about gaslighting in, shall we say, online forms, because that's something that wasn't there 15, 20 years ago. And I know that you're relatively new to the world of therapy. So, you've clearly had success that we'll touch on in a future episode of this miniseries, but you've pretty much been a therapist for the entire time that social media has been out there. So I guess the best way to go about this is just to broach the subject broadly. But what is your opinion on the way that we interact on social media with each other? And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it neutrally anyway. Do you think that there is some damage that it's been doing?
Yes, because it is a constant comparison game, right? And social media so often can be just highlights of how they want to be perceived. And it's tough to develop discernment around there. Now, in comments, trolls are going to be trolls, right? And they live under the bridge. And it's kind of like if somebody writes a negative comment in one of my posts, I like to think of the metaphor. If I'm walking downtown Charleston and from the other side of the street, somebody yells, "Hey, stupid," do I turn around? Do I believe that about myself? You see what I'm saying? Do I say, "Hey, why did you call me that?" They might have been talking to somebody else. They might have been, out of their mind, whatever. And so oftentimes you can see, again, alluding back to the first episode about the tennis ball, people just want a reaction, and that's where their energy comes from, within comments. And so, yes, I read my comments, and when there hasn't been many, but when there's something negative, I'll just have to be like, what type of state are those people in to put out that venom, right? Because it's not the snake bite that kills you, it's the venom that stays around. So am I going to pick that venom up? Now, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she's not on social media. She doesn't have a phone, but I've already seen the influence that, say, YouTube and things like that have, which is a very, very tough thing to navigate. And so just speaking of like my 12-year-old daughter, there's a whole thing nowadays about, these tweens having skincare routines and driving them to like Sephora and Ulta. And it's out of control, Neil. And I'm like, look, beauty comes from the inside. And true beauty is when you can love yourself, and you are getting bombarded by influence. Go back to what feels right. If you see anything that gives you any sort of feeling that I'm not good enough, I need to be doing this, I'm not happy with myself based on this comparison thing, then you need to change the channel, because it's hard. And this is a big conversation, but I do think social media can be a good thing when there is positive interaction and creating a community within that dynamic. When it's just voyeurism and casting venomous comments, I think that's where we get to the lowest rung of human connection,
That is one of the things that, and I was not taking offense at all when you said you thought I was 35 or 40. I thought that was cool that you thought that highly of me. I took it as a compliment, but that's the one thing that I still struggle with, and I think a lot of people who are on social media probably struggle with too. Whether I happen to have a fairly large following, I could cover the Florida Gators. I believe you're a rival, but it's not always the easiest to put that into practice in the moment. You're doing a live stream, you're talking about something that you like, you're talking you think fairly sensibly, you've done your research, you know what you're talking about. You maybe have a guest on, a player, a recruit, a former player, and someone just says something that, they probably wouldn't say in person for multiple different reasons, but they say it, and then it's almost a game of like, I know you wouldn't say that in person. You're a sad person to be doing that online. But in the heat of the moment, you want to go so much more viciously after them. At least I do. And I'm sure that a lot of kids do too. If I do as a grown up, kids are going to be influenced by that. If they want to get influencer status when they're 15 or 16, especially on Instagram, which really rewards that, it gets really easy. And then they're down a rabbit hole that is not so easy to pull themselves out of. So again, there's the knowledge of this in the back of your mind. There's knowledge of it in principle, and then there's knowledge of it in practicality. How do you recommend that people who are facing trolls and hate, not even just trolls, but actual hate on social media, go about putting this more mature thought process into practice in the heat of the moment?
That's a multi-layer question, Neil. But there's a great quote: "The less I pay attention to you, the faster you disappear." Now, yes, they can leave comments after comments after comment, but what they're looking for is your reaction, right? They're looking for that, just like that guy cutting you off, that we mentioned in the first episode. If I respond back and flick off that person because he cut me off, now there's an interaction there. And here's the thing is that the majority of people that are trolling, they get energy from those negative interactions. They feel alive, and it's unfortunate that way. However, so how do you keep things alive, or how do you let them go away? You either starve it or you feed it. And so if you want, eventually they'll probably get tired. Now that takes some resilience and a very strong moral constitution not to interact when it starts getting vitriol, However, you can, and you might be able to correct me wrong. I don't think you can erase comments, but you can pin positive ones up top, right?
Yeah. Pretty much.
But if you interact negatively on your Florida Gators blog, correct?
Yeah. Podcast, blogs,
all of that. Do you think, looking forward, that'll be a positive outcome or a negative outcome?
Negative, 100%. Right. But again, that's where the question comes from, because I know that now. It's very easy to say that now.
Yeah.
It's in the heat of the moment when you're talking to a player or a former player, or you're going off of your own notes and research and just doing a solo show, and you're in a groove, and then on the live stream it pops up, and in the heat of the moment, it's not as easy as it is now. And this isn't even really about me. It's about, as you're talking about with kids growing up with social media, the bullying there with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old minds, it's very different than me as a grown-up. So how do you really the question's for them, how do you recommend that they go from, I heard that from a therapist, or my mom told me that, it's easy to say that, whatever, to do it in real time?
Yeah, that's tough with teenagers specifically, because their communities start to become online, and that we all want to be deep down accepted. And that is as I mentioned in the first episode, our minds are there to see threats. Well, the other part of our mind is to feel connection with people, because in a tribal world that we used to live in, if we were banished from that tribe, that basically meant our death. And so inherently, subconsciously, we want to be accepted as part of the group. And so when there's a teenager that is getting online bullied, that's so tough because it's behind a screen. And that aspect of picking up what I'm going to pick up what these people are telling me and believe that about myself, this is hard. And I'm not, there's really not an easy answer to this. But here's what we do have at our house is that I am enough, because I mentioned that some of the main issues with people are they just don't believe they're worthy or enough. So on our fridge, there's a magnet that says I am enough. On my wife and I's mirror, there's a Post-it note that says I am enough. And if you can put that, and I even, for a while there, it was on my son and daughter's mirror, but I did see my 9-year-old son actually writing it down on a little piece of paper in his room. So the more we can reinforce those positives, those negatives will have less of an impact. Now, I get it, because you're talking about in real time. That's tough because what you have to do is actually create that aspect of discernment of backing up and take a breath, let that anger pass through. Do you have time for that? I'm not sure. But you have to do that again, that vitriol, that hate is energy. And so are you going to pick up and hold that energy, or are you going to let it pass through? And we hold on to a lot of stuff, and we even say, oh man, that's heavy. Why is it heavy? Because I picked it up and I'm holding it.
Yeah, I guess it would weigh 0 pounds if you just let it sit there on the floor.
Right. I'm not going to pick that up.
Well, again, it goes back to what you said about perspective. It's how we think of things. It's how we personalize them. It weighs 0 pounds to you if you don't pick it up.
Correct.
It weighs whatever it weighs if you choose to hold it in your arms.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, again, a lot of good, insightful content that we got today in part 2 of our mini series with Jonathan Boncek. We've got more coming for you, but as we wrap up this particular episode, be sure to remember that in the face of adversity, there's always the potential for growth, resilience, and success. And just a reminder, this man openly says that he was bullied as a child for his weight, and whatever kids were saying to you is obviously not negatively impacted you who you are today. You've turned that into quite a positive. So the last episode, the last guest that we had, Joe Gallagher, overcame quite a bit of adversity of his own, and before that, Megan Brown overcame quite a bit of adversity on her own. These are 3 thriving individuals today as adults. So nothing is truly insurmountable. Remember that. Join us every other Monday as we continue to explore inspiring stories of overcoming challenges to help you thrive in your journey of life. Jonathan, until next time, it's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Neil. Love being here.